So let's build an interactive dashboard in Microsoft Excel. A dashboard basically tells a story about how a business is performing. It provides a visual display of things that are going well and maybe not going well. It's kind of like the dashboard in your car that shows you whether you're going to run out of gas, whether you're going too fast or too slow, whether a tire needs to be inflated. That's all information that can help make decisions. So if you want to follow along with this video, the data set or a link to it is in the video description below. So before we dive in and start creating our dashboard, we have to understand what data we have and then what types of business questions we want to answer. So in this particular data set, we've got 4 years of orders. And each row in this data set represents an item in an order. And there can be multiple items in the same order. So look at rows 2 and 3. These are 2 separate items being purchased in one order. It's also got some other information like the date the order was shipped, who the customer is, the customer's state, the product ID, the product category, the product name, and then at the very end here, the quantity that was purchased, any discount that was applied, and then it shows you the sales for that item in the order and the profit that was generated. Now let's think about some of the business questions we might want to answer using a dashboard. Remember, it goes back to what we really want to know about our business, what questions we need to answer. So in this case, it could be things like, are sales increasing over time? Are those sales seasonal? In what states are we selling the most? What types of products are most popular? And so on. So let's keep it simple first. What we're going to do is create separate charts for our dashboard, and then we'll bring it together at the end. So one of the first questions I might want to know about my data is what were sales and profit over time? It's a fairly common question. So what I'm going to do is select a cell in my table. I'm going to go to the Insert tab and click on Insert Pivot Chart. So there's another video that talks about pivot tables and pivot charts. Basically, pivot tables help you to slice and dice your data so you don't have to do a bunch of summary calculations on your own. You can let Excel do the work for you. With a pivot chart, you're taking a pivot table and just adding a chart on top of it. And so we're going to use these pivot charts in a few cases on our dashboard for a few of the charts that we plan to put in it. Okay, so I'm going to insert this pivot chart, then click OK. And this is what's going to appear. And let me zoom in so you can see this a bit better. Now what I want to do is, because I want sales and profit over time, I got to think about what my time measurement is. And I'm going to use the order date in this case. I'm going to take the order date and drag it down to the axis. So it shows me what years we have order data for, 2014 to 2017. And I will tell you, if Microsoft Excel didn't group this nicely for you by year, what you may have to do is right-click the cells and change the grouping. Change the grouping here. And make sure you're grouping, in this case, by years, quarters, and months. For our case, though, if it grouped it for you nicely, let's just select the years and the quarters. Maybe we don't need to go all the way down to the months. Maybe because we're reporting our sales on a quarterly basis, that's what's most important. So let's stick with years and quarters. I'll click OK. And so now I can see each year and each quarter. Now what I want to do is go back to my pivot table fields and drag sales down to the values. Okay, so I've got my sum of sales, and I also want to take my profit down to the values as well. So I see my sales and my profit. There's a few things that I want to do to clean this up a bit. Right now in my pivot table, where I have the column where I have the years and quarters, it just says row labels. I want to change this to say year and quarter. And then what I also want to do is change my dollar values here, or my numbers, to the currency format. So I'm going to select all of these numbers here and change that to the currency format. And because these are fairly large numbers, what I'm going to do is just round off the decimal places to make this a little bit easier to read. Okay, so I've got my pivot table that I've created, and our chart is starting to come together. Now what we want to do, though, is instead of using a bar chart or a column chart in this case, when we're measuring things over time, a really good chart for serving that purpose is a line chart. And so I'm going to select my chart, go up to the Design tab, and click on Change Chart Type. And instead of using a column chart, I'm going to go to the line option, and I'm going to select the line chart with markers. That's what I want to go with. And then I'll click OK. Okay, so now it shows me the line up above is my sales, and the line down below is profit. Really nice view. It's a better perspective than you would get with just that column chart. Now, one of the things that I see that's interesting here is it looks like there's some seasonality in my sales. In the fourth quarter every year, our sales are fairly high, and then in quarter one, they tend to drop down. And the line chart shows me that view about seasonality pretty nicely. The other thing that I might want to do here is change the style of this chart. I want my dashboard to look nice, and so I want to style this up a bit and make it easy for people to read and understand. So the first thing that I probably want to do is add a title to the chart. I want people to know what they're looking at, and right now maybe that's not as easy to interpret. And so on the Design tab, I want to go to Add Chart Element and click on Chart Title, and then have a chart title above the chart. And let's rename this to say Sales and Profit by Quarter. Now, if somebody looks at it, they know pretty much right away what they're looking at. Another thing that I might want to do is take all of these gray fields and remove those. Now, they can be helpful. You can use some of these for filtering, but from my experience, most of the people that are looking at your dashboard aren't that as familiar with how these things work, and it can just take up space in your chart. So the way to hide these things is to right-click one of them and say Hide All Field Buttons on the chart. The other thing that we want to change is this legend on the right-hand side is kind of taking up a lot of space, and we've got a lot of white area over here. Let's clean that up. And so we're going to move this down to the bottom of the chart. So I'm going to right-click the legend and say Format Legend. And I should see this Format Legend option appear, and I want to change the legend position to the bottom. Now I've got a little bit more room in my chart for those things that really matters most. It's the actual lines itself and the dollar values on the axis. I also want to give it a little bit of a style, and whatever style I choose for my charts, I just want to make sure they're consistent across the dashboard so I have a common look and feel. I'm going to select, if I go to the Design tab, I'm going to select this particular style. You can feel free to select a different one, but you just want to make sure you stay consistent. So your dashboard doesn't look like a big mess. It looks like it's a cohesive thing. It goes together. Now, what we also might want to do here, what's going to be important, is to rename this worksheet. So if someone picks up this worksheet, this Excel workbook, and tries to understand what each worksheet does or what purpose it serves, that's clear. And so we'll say Sales by Quarter. Change it to Sales by Quarter. Now, the other thing that I can do here is add some slicers to help make my dashboard interactive when I put all these charts on it. And so in this case, an interesting slicer might be what's called a timeline slicer. So I'm going to click on this chart. I'm going to go to the Analyze tab and click on Insert Timeline. And I'm going to choose the order date because that's what I've been sticking with. All the data that you see here is based on that order date, not the shipment date. So I'll select that and click OK. And I'll see this timeline slicer appear. Now, what you can do is click on a month in this case, and it's going to change your chart up above based on what you selected. Now, instead of going with months, let's go with years. You can choose quarters too if you want to, but let's stick with years for now. And so it gives me the option to click on a particular year and just see those sales. So I can select 1 year, or I can drag it and select multiple years. Okay, we'll click Clear Filter. And now we've got a pretty good first chart for our dashboard, showing sales and profit by quarter. Now let's go back to our source data and think about the next question. Another question we might have, a business question, might be, what were our sales by product category? If we look on the right-hand side of our data here, we see product categories like furniture, office supplies, and technology, and then subcategories within each of those higher level categories. So we might want to know which of these categories are selling the most, because maybe we decide that we want to focus our energy on a specific product category, or maybe we want to decommission some products that just aren't selling well and that are taking up space in our warehouse. Okay, so what we want to do is go back to the Insert tab and insert a new pivot chart. And I'm going to leave all the default settings and click OK. And since I want to see sales by product category, on the right-hand side where my pivot table fields are, I'm going to take the product category, drag that down to the axis, and I see those three categories: furniture, office supplies, and technology. And what I'm going to do is change row labels, because that's not going to make sense to most people who take a look at this, to products category. And before I forget, I also want to change the name of the worksheet so that when someone opens this up, even when they see the dashboard, they may want to look in other areas of the workbook, they'll know exactly where to find what they're looking for. So we'll say sales by product category. We'll call that, change the worksheet to that name. And then we want to go back to our pivot table and then take sales and drag that down to the values. Now what I'm going to do to clean this up a bit again is to take my sales, select those numeric values, and change the format to currency. And then I'll round out the decimal places because they're fairly large numbers. The decimal places aren't that significant in this case. One other thing we could also do is sort the sales by category from largest to smallest. So I'll right click and say sort largest to smallest. And so I see on my chart now that I have technology as the highest selling product category, and then furniture and office supplies after that. Now, a couple of things about our chart. First of all, we ought to change the title to something that makes sense. So let's try sales by product category. And then I can actually remove this legend because at this moment, it's not helping me really at all. If I was to break out sales by expenses and profit perhaps, and use different color for those, the legend would be useful, but here it's not. And so I'm going to just select it and click delete to remove that. And then I'm going to hide these gray field buttons again because those aren't that helpful. There's my chart, sales by product category. But let's try something else. Maybe we want to know not just by product category, but also product subcategory. I'm going to take my product subcategory now and drag that below the category on the axis. Okay, so now I've got sales by product category and then subcategory. But like with my product categories, at the lower level, the subcategory, we can also sort those to make it easier for people to understand the chart. So I'm going to click one of these numeric values in my subcategories, and I'm going to sort from largest to smallest. Now, if you look at my chart, within each of the categories, I can easily see the highest selling subcategories. Now, before I move on to the next chart, I want to make sure I change the design of this chart so it matches the other one that I already created. Remember, we want to have a common look and feel on our dashboard, so it doesn't look like a mess. It looks like it's supposed to all go together. And so I'm going to stick with this style. You could choose a different one, just again, make sure that it's consistent. And then now that I've got my style, the only last thing I may want to add are a couple of slicers. Remember, we want these dashboards to be interactive, and these slicers really help with that. So I'm going to go to the Analyze tab, and I'm going to say Insert Slicer. Click that button. And let's say I want to slice this data. Let's choose the customer region and the customer segment. Now, typically when you're inserting these slicers, you want to choose categories, because if you show something like the customer name, your slicer could have thousands in the list, which isn't that helpful. You probably want to choose larger categories. And so we'll select these two, customer segment and customer region, and then click OK, and you'll see these two slicers appear. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shrink these a little bit because I don't need them to be that large. There's only a few category of options. And then I might want to test this just to make sure it's working. So if after I've created this chart, I click the central region, my chart should change to show only sales from the central region. And then I can also slice by customer segment. Maybe I want consumer customers. Now my chart is showing consumer customers in the central region. What I could do is if I want to select multiple options within each of these slicers, I could hit Control now and select another one like corporate, and it's going to include that. But in most cases, when people are interacting with your dashboards, they may not know to do that. And so one of the options that you can include here, I'll just uncheck or clear the filters, you see these check marks. These are called multi-selects. You can click that, which will allow you to select multiple options or remove multiple options. So it just kind of depends on how you want people to interact with the dashboard. Do you want them to use that multi-select or select something and hit control? It's really up to you. Now I've got two charts for our dashboard, sales and profit over time, and sales by product category and subcategory. Let's create one more. Let's go back to our source data, our sales for this 4-year period, and let's maybe try to create a chart that shows us sales by state, sales by particular US states. And we're going to do this one a little bit differently, and I'll explain why in a second. But I'm going to go to the Insert tab and click on Insert Pivot Table and leave the default settings. And now what I'm going to do is drop the customer state down to the rows. And right now I'll go ahead and change row labels to state. And you could put customer state if you wanted to. I'll just leave state. And let's rename the worksheet to sales by state. And then we go back to our pivot table. We'll collect the sales field and drag that down to the values. It's showing a sum of sales by the state. And then I'll also change the numeric values here from just a general format to the currency format. And then I like to round off the decimal places when you have large values like this to make it easier to read. Now let's try a new chart that we haven't used yet. Let's go to the Insert tab and click on Maps and then choose the filled map. Okay, we've got a problem here. It says you can't create this chart with data inside a pivot table. Please select a different chart type or copy the data outside of the pivot table. I think that over time this will be corrected, but for right now you can't create these map charts based on a pivot table. So what we've got to do is copy the data out of the pivot table, paste it elsewhere, and then create our map chart. And so what I'm going to do is select everything except for the grand total in my pivot table. I'm going to copy that, but I have to paste it in a special way. If you go back to the Home tab and click on this Paste dropdown, what I want you to do is to paste as values or paste values and number formatting so we keep that currency setting. Now I should be able to insert my map chart. So I'm going to select this table, go to Insert, and click on Insert Map and the filled map. Now what this shows me is for all the US states where we've sold products, if the color is darker blue, those are higher sales. If it's lighter blue, we have fewer sales in those areas. Okay, so I'm going to move this to the right here, and now I need to rename it. Let's say sales by state, and I might even say what period this is, 2014 to 2017. And this is going to be important in a few minutes because when we make some adjustments to our slicers on our dashboard, it's not actually going to reflect for this particular chart. So this is going to stay fairly static on our dashboard. And so what I want to do is make sure I include the years there. And before we go forward, let me just mention that in most cases, I don't like to take data out of a pivot table to create a chart like this, because when you want to refresh your data, like if you add more orders, or if you make some adjustments to orders, like if there was a refund, when you want to refresh your charts, it can be a little more difficult in this scenario. You can't just refresh your pivot table, you've got to refresh your pivot table and repaste your data. It's just something to be aware of. And again, I think Microsoft will fix this issue in the future, but there's not a solution at this point. Now that we've got our three charts, the three charts we want to use for our dashboard, let's start putting our dashboard together. So I'm going to create a new worksheet, which I am going to call the sales dashboard. And I want to put this in caps so it really stands out. And I want to move it to the front of my worksheets. I want it to be first. I might also even consider changing the tab color so it stands out even further. Okay, so here's our sales dashboard. Now what we're going to do is take those three charts and their slicers, copy and paste them into here. Now just so you know, as we start copying and pasting these charts and slicers into the dashboard, it might take a little bit of finagling to get it to look the way we want it to. That's okay. All right, so let's go to sales by quarter. we'll copy this chart and paste it over into our sales dashboard. And then we'll go to sales by product category, copy our chart and our slicers from there, paste those into our sales dashboard, put them over here. And then we'll go to sales by state, copy our chart from here, and paste that into our dashboard. Now it's up to you how you want to arrange these. It doesn't have to be exactly like I'm going to show you, but this is just one way of doing it. So I think that sales and profit by quarter is probably the most important chart that we're going to have on our dashboard. So I want to keep that on the top left corner. And then I'm going to put sales by product category right next to it. And then I'll put sales by state. I'm actually going to move that to the bottom left corner. And I'm going to minimize it a bit so it's the same size as the chart above it, so it gives it a nice look and feel. And I'm going to take my slicers, I'm going to move these down to the bottom right corner. Okay. And maybe I want to adjust these so they're a uniform size, again, so it gives it a nice look and feel. Okay, so now that I've got my dashboard set up, we need to make one more adjustment to make this work well together, to make it really interactive. Now, right now, if I look at this slicer, customer region, and I click on central, what it's going to do is it's going to change the sales by product category chart, and only that one. Because when we created that chart, that's when we created the slicer. Now I'm going to clear this filter so I can show you how to fix that. When you right-click this slicer and click on Report Connections, what you can do is check both the sales by product category and the sales by quarter pivot tables. Now you could also select the sales by state, but here's the problem. Because this chart, the sales by state chart, is based on data outside of the pivot table, the pivot table will change, but your chart won't because it's working with static data. Just a shortcoming there, just something to be aware of. That's why when we created the sales by state chart, we actually put specifically the years that were in consideration, just in case the other ones are filtered a different way. Okay, so I'm going to click OK now. And now when I go to the customer region and I click on Central, you're going to see the top two charts change to reflect that. Now I've got to do the same thing for the customer region slicer. I'm going to right-click that, click on Report Connections, and then include sales by quarter. Click OK. And now if I select one of the customer segments, both of the charts up above will change. So that's how it becomes interactive. You can make sure that those slicers are connected with the charts, where at least you have that option to make those connections. Okay, so I'm going to clear these filters and reset my chart. The other thing that you may want to do here is up at the top, include a header. You can decide what you want that to be, but you can merge some cells up in the top and say something like sales quarterly dashboard and give it some, a description or something like that. That's up to you. One thing that I would really suggest though is that when you get your dashboard to where you want it to be, select the cells that includes all your charts, your slicers, and your header if you have that. Then go to the page layout setting and then print area and then set the print area. Some people who look at your dashboard are going to prefer a printed copy, which is okay. There's some people who prefer that. And so by doing this, you make sure that the entire dashboard gets printed. One thing that I would suggest though is just to try this out, go to File, Print, and then make some adjustments to see that it all fits on one page. So in this case, what I want to do is change portrait orientation to landscape. And then under scaling, I want to change it from no scaling to fit sheet on one page. Now I've got my entire dashboard fitting on a single page. And so if someone decides they want to print it, it'll print fairly easily. And it may be that you just want to PDF it anyway, and that's how you're going to send it to them. Totally fine. A couple other things to be aware of. And let's go back to the source data as we talk about this. In most cases, what you're going to want to do is add some additional data or updated data and have your dashboard change, because maybe you're providing these reports on a weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis, and you don't want to keep recreating these visuals. You just want to refresh the visuals based on updated data. And so in order to do that, once you add new data or update data, you can go to the Data tab and click on Refresh All right there, and that's going to refresh your pivot tables. One caution though, remember that sales by state chart is based on data outside of a pivot table. So when we refresh it, we just have to make sure we copy and paste the updated data on the right here. And then also, you want to make sure that when you update these pivot tables, that it's actually connecting to the right data source. Okay, so let's give you an example. So let's say in this source data here, we've got all of our sales, 4 years of sales. It looks like we have about 9,995 records. If we add data below that, like additional orders, usually Excel and the pivot tables will recognize that, but we might just want to double check. And so if you've refreshing the pivot tables and you may not be seeing updates, it could be that you just need to make sure you include those additional rows in the pivot table. So let me give you an example. Let's go to the sales by quarter pivot table here. And then I'll go to the Analyze tab, and I can click on Change Data Source, and it'll show me what columns and rows are being selected. And I just want to make sure that all my rows are included. All right, I hope this was helpful, that you make some awesome dashboards, and I'll see you in another video.